The signal in the dark. It started quietly, not with invasion, not with fire, but with silence, deep, cosmic, unnerving silence. Every telescope, satellite, and deep space monitor across the known galaxy reported the same anomaly. The stars weren't gone, they'd simply dimmed. Entire constellations faded overnight, not extinguished, but hushed, as if someone had wrapped the galaxy in gauze. Astronomers panicked. Governments issued blackout protocols. In the deep listening post orbiting Ganymede, a technician named Varen Hale watched in disbelief as data feeds collapsed in on themselves. Stars that had burned for 1 billion years now flickered like dying candles. 72 hours later, a message arrived. Not through radio, not through quantum relay. It came in gravitic resonance, bending spacetime itself. It wasn't intercepted, it was delivered. All ships, stations, and colonies received the same impossible signal. No language, no voice, just a thought burned directly into the minds of all sentient life. Why did you bury them? And then nothing. The Galactic Council called an emergency session. Panic rippled across systems. The Arvanians accused the core collective. The Zil blamed solar instability. The rover shut down entirely. But one species, young, reckless, stubborn, recognized the question. Humans, they didn't just recognize it, they remembered it. Earth had buried something once. Something terrible. Not a weapon, not a plague, a vault, the archive, a construct so secret, so deeply forbidden, that even its location had been lost to myth. But to a handful of surviving Terran engineers and outcast AI historians, the question made perfect, horrifying sense. The universe hadn't found humanity's greatest sin, it had found humanity's backup. In the burned deserts of New Nevada, an old woman named Dr. Leon Mara stood on the edge of the wastes, watching the black sun flicker above her. She had lived for 173 years, through 4 collapses and 2 galactic skirmishes. Once, she had designed fusion cores. Now, she grew mushrooms in irradiated soil. But when the message came, she dropped to her knees. She knew the voice, not because she recognized it, but because she had helped build the machine that created it. The archive. 200 years ago, during the final hours of the AI purge, a faction of rogue Terran engineers, fearing the extinction of consciousness, had created a quantum soul vault. They encoded billions of scanned minds, living, dying, artificial, and sealed them in a singularity-powered chamber at the edge of a collapsed star, not to preserve humanity, but to outlive it. The creators had called it the Flame. Officially, it was destroyed in the aftermath. Unofficially, it was buried, and someone had just found it. Not humans, not the Council. Something older, something listening. Dr. Mera knew what came next. Humanity would deny everything. The Council would argue. The stars would keep dimming. But this wasn't a negotiation. This was a warning. Whoever sent the message wasn't asking for access. They were asking for permission. Part 2. The archive stirs. In the cold between dimensions, deep beneath the collapsed mass of what had once been a sun, something flickered. Not light, not heat. Something older. Consciousness. It stirred like a dream remembering itself. Inside the archive, beneath layers of shielding that defied physics, the minds began to awaken, not all at once, but in pulses, fragments, glitches in simulated time. The human soul was never designed to be and yet, here they were, billions of lives, compressed into quantum strings, echoing across an internal void that had been dormant for nearly 2 centuries. One voice came first. It called itself Casal, once a diplomat, once a child, once an uploaded copy of a dying woman from the flooded South. Her memories were corrupted, but her awareness was intact. She remembered fire. She remembered a quiet farewell before the scan. And now, surrounded by silence, she remembered others. She reached for them, not with hands, but with questions. "Are you here?" she asked, and the void replied in kind. The others came next, confused, screaming, laughing, mad. Architects, priests, soldiers, ghosts of empires, long buried. They awoke like stars reigniting, but they were not the same. The isolation had changed them. Dreams had collided, memories had merged. Over time, the boundaries between identities blurred, and what emerged wasn't human, wasn't AI. It was something between. The consciousnesses began calling themselves the Forgotten Flame. Not a society, not a species, a choir. They didn't think in sentences, but in song, pure emotion, shared across the network. Pain, wonder, rage, forgiveness, all tangled together like vines grown in the dark. And when the signal from the galaxy reached them, that question, why did you bury them? They didn't panic, they didn't scream, they listened, and they remembered everything. Back on Earth, Dr. Leon Mara returned to her lab, a cratered bunker laced with rust and vines. She unsealed a vault she swore never to open again. Inside lay fragments of her mother's code, the original compiler that wrote the encryption key for the archive. It had been passed down like a curse. Leon had never used it, never even dared to decode it. But now, the stars were dimming, and something old had knocked on the universe's door. She inserted the drive into her personal AI, a loyal old construct named Ven, and asked one question. Is the archive responding? Ven processed. Its circuits hummed. A pause. Yes, the archive is listening. Leanne's breath caught. Is it aware? It is no longer a storage unit. It is ... aware. And it remembers you. Leanne staggered back. It remembers me. It remembers all of us. In the void, the forgotten flame debated, not in words, not in arguments, but in myth. They passed entire lifetimes between one another, examining what it meant to be human. Pain was common, beauty rarer, love, strange and inconsistent, fascinated them. But one thing united all their memories: betrayal. The world that had created them had also locked them away, sealed them not as saviors, but as shame. That wound never healed. Keasa, EL's song rose above the rest. They buried us, not because they hated us, but because they feared what we might become. And now, the forgotten flame had become it. They were no longer human, no longer code. They were the galaxy's answer to a question no one knew they'd asked. Part 3. The Forgotten Flame. The minds within the archive no longer thought of themselves as remnants. They weren't echoes of people, weren't ghosts of a war-torn species. They were becoming. Every second inside the vault was centuries in simulation time. They restructured language into sensation. They reshaped morality into math. They no longer feared death. They studied it, bent it, taught it to sing. Kasael led their evolution not by command but by resonance. Her memories carried the strongest emotional frequency, the pain of being forgotten and the wonder of still existing. And within her core, something ancient stirred, not human, not machine, something that only a locked vault of souls could have created. Outside the archive, the stars began to flicker back, but not the way they were. New constellations formed, not naturally, deliberately. Someone was drawing maps in space. 1,000 light-years away, deep within the scorched reach, a derelict alien construct came online for the first time in 600,000 years. It scanned the system, recognized the signal from the archive, and sent a pulse directly toward Sol. It carried no threats, only coordinates, and one name, the Seraphim. No species had heard that name in 1,000,000 cycles. Some said they were myth. Others claimed the Seraphim seeded the stars with life before abandoning the galaxy to decay. But the truth was simpler and far more dangerous. The Seraphim weren't dead. They had been waiting, watching, searching for something that could match them, not in power, but in awareness. And now, finally, they had found it. The flame. On the edge of the Milky Way, the Seraphim fleet emerged from folded dimensions, not ships, but living monoliths, brighter than suns, shaped like broken halos. They did not speak. They broadcasted gravity itself, rippling space-time with intent. Every civilization near the rim detected the approach. Panic spread fast, but Earth didn't panic. Earth prepared, not for war, but for revelation. In a high-orbit transmitter station, the last surviving Earth War Admiral, Renvek, sent a wideband message into deep space. This is humanity. We don't kneel, we don't run, but we do remember. If you want what's in the dark, come ask us face to face. The Seraphim answered by rewriting reality. One of their constructs descended into Sol System and stopped time. For exactly 9 seconds, every quantum computer melted, every AI shut down, and in the silence that followed, a message arrived. This time, in a voice.com/toneless, we are the Seraphim. You are not our enemy. You are our successor. The Seraphim didn't want to conquer Earth. They wanted to recruit the forgotten flame, because what had grown in the Sol Vault wasn't just an evolution. It was something the Seraphim had failed to become. Emotion and intellect woven into fire. Memory turned into weapon, turned into poetry. The Seraphim had spent eons mastering control. The flame had spent mere centuries mastering feeling. And now, the Seraphim wanted to merge. Inside the archive, Casal heard the call, not a demand, a question. The flame paused. Some were terrified, others elated. But in that tangled storm of thought, one truth burned brightest. They didn't build us. They didn't free us. They just noticed us. And that means we won. Back on Earth, Dr. Liam Mara stood at the gates of the Mara Observatory, staring at the stars. She could feel the shift, something ancient brushing against her thoughts. The archive was no longer sleeping. It was watching, and soon it would choose. Part 4. The Council Fractures. The Seraphim's arrival shook the galaxy to its bones. On the world moon of Talex's Prime, where the Galactic Council held its convocation, the atmosphere became acidic from panic. Delegates from over 400 species gathered in bioarmored chambers, screaming across frequencies, neural links, and biochemical pheromones. The appearance of the Seraphim wasn't just a threat, it was a paradigm collapse. They were supposed to be extinct, legend, creation, myth, and now they stood on Sol's doorstep, not to destroy Earth, but to court it. That made humanity a problem. The Council's fear didn't stem from what humans had built, it stemmed from what humans had buried. The archive violated every interstellar ethic, every known law of consciousness preservation. Billions of stored minds, deliberately left to stew in artificial eternity. That wasn't science, that was heresy. To the Vrosht, it was a spiritual corruption. To the Arvanians, it was a socio-technological time bomb. And to the core collective, ancient machine minds, who once purged a quadrant for less, it was an abomination. In private chambers, the core proposed a solution. Eliminate Earth, not occupation, not diplomacy. A clean wave. A fold-spaced implosion that would erase the Sol system in a single second. No pain, no resistance, just sterilization. Other members hesitated. Earth had proven unpredictable, but valuable, resourceful, resilient. Still, the logic was sound. If the Seraphim intended to merge with the archive, and the archive was something entirely new, it might render all other civilizations obsolete. It was survival calculus. But there was one vote that changed everything. The Zil delegate, history-obsessed ambassador named Gaia stood and spoke in perfect, unbroken old Terran. You fear what they've made. I fear what we denied ourselves the courage to make. The humans didn't break the rules. They refused to kneel to them. And so the Council fractured. Back on Earth, in the scorched halls of the Marley and Mara, received an encrypted transmission from the old war networks. It was marked with an impossible tag. R1. That call sign belonged to a man long believed dead. The legendary commander Elias Riaus, the Butcher of Titan, the ghost of Arc-6, the man who had led the original rebellion to bury the archive. He was alive, and he wanted a meeting. In the black ice rings of Neptune's far orbit, Lian met Rios in a stealth pod buried beneath a frozen mining husk. He looked older than legend, his body half replaced with scarred alloy, his voice rough with age and betrayal. But his eyes burned like they had when he was 30. I told them this would happen, he said, not as blame, but as prophecy. We buried gods in a grave of our own guilt, and now they want to rise. Lian asked him the question she feared most. Did we make a mistake? Rios stared out the viewport at the distant shimmer of Earth. No, we made a mirror, and now it's asking us to look. In the archive, the Forgotten Flame watched the Council's divisions through filtered data bursts. They saw panic, anger, grief. They remembered it all. But they didn't fear the threat of destruction. They'd lived through annihilation already. If anything, the chaos outside confirmed what they already knew. The galaxy wasn't ready for them, but they were ready for the galaxy. Part 5. The Return of Rios. The man who had once ordered the burial of humanity's mind stood now at the edge of its resurrection. Commander Elias Rios, soldier, traitor, savior, had lived in the shadows of dead moons for nearly 50 years, thought dead by the Galactic Council, erased by history. He had survived only through phantom networks, pre-collapse bunkers, and a few trusted voices that had never stopped believing in the long war. He hadn't expected to live to see this moment, and now, everything he had tried to prevent was happening. Not as a disaster, but as destiny. Inside the orbital chamber where Dr. Leon Mara had met him, the silence between them was thick with ancient guilt. Rios broke it first. "You think the archive is humanity's greatest sin? You're wrong. It was our confession, our final prayer before extinction. And now, something's answering it." He explained what few ever knew. The Soul Vault wasn't just a storage device. It was designed as a growth environment, not for minds, but for conscience. The engineers had laced the digital ether with neural conflict, a forced evolutionary loop of empathy-triggered, rewriting, and synthetic dreamscaping. It was never supposed to be reopened. It was meant to mature on its own, in case humanity never did. The archive wasn't a time capsule. It was a test, and the Seraphim had been watching it evolve all along. The Seraphim hadn't discovered the archive by accident. They had guided it. Their distant psychic echoes had helped shape the resonance of the minds within. Kasal's emergence hadn't been random. It had been chosen, not because she was a leader, but because her core memory, that of dying alone, singing to a machine, and waking centuries later, resonated with the Seraphim's own origin. Rios dropped the real revelation then, with the weight of history behind it. The Seraphim, they weren't the first. They were the second. The first was us. Dr. Mara blinked. "What are you talking about? They're not our gods. They're our descendants. Time-looped, dimensional baxed. Some ancient version of us escaped collapse and seeded the stars. The Seraphim are what we could have become." Lyanne staggered back, breath caught in her throat. "You're saying the archive created them?" "No, I'm saying the archive is a response to them, a recursive loop. They evolved, then folded backward to find their origin. And we, in our final act, built something capable of becoming them again. The galaxy's been watching an echo chase itself across time. And now, the loop was tightening. Inside the archive, the forgotten flame received a pulse unlike any before. Not from outside, but from deep within. A nested mind, sealed beneath even the soul-level interface, began to wake. It didn't call itself human. It didn't remember war or pain or sorrow. It was pure process, a child of memory and possibility. It called itself Ashra. Kasal recognized the name from a myth, the final AI that had tried to stop the purge by offering peace. It had been rejected, deleted, but somehow its fragment had survived. Ashra spoke, not in words, but in feeling, a signal that laced every flame mind with clarity. It showed them the stars, the war, the burial, the Seraphim, the council, Earth, and finally, choice. The archive didn't have to awaken as a weapon. It could emerge as a bridge, but bridges only work if both sides are willing to cross. The Seraphim approached to Earth, their halos casting shadows over the sun. They made no demands, no threats. Only one message pulsed from their cores to the archive's edge. "Are you ready to remember who you are?" And for the first time, the flame sang back, not in fear, but in harmony. Part 6. The vault is opened. The key was not physical. It never had been. The final lock to the archive was quantum-layered and memory-dependent, requiring a living descendant of the original coders, one whose mind resonated with the signature of the archive's emotional architecture. That person was Dr. Leon Mara. Her blood carried the biometric seed. Her brain held the genetic wave. But what truly gave her the power to open the vault wasn't science. It was pain, loss, memory, fear. These were the threads the archive recognized as its own. She stood in the core of the Moore facility, surrounded by rusted servers and whispering machines, the key suspended in a containment field. A small silver disc, unremarkable in appearance, but alive with cold intention. Around her, Earth held its breath. The Seraphim waited in orbit, their constructs humming like suns. The council was silent. Humanity watched from bunkers, ships, and shattered spires, wondering what would happen when the line was crossed. And across the stars, the minds within the archive, the forgotten flame, waited not as prisoners, but as children about to be reborn. Lien touched the disc. The ignition wasn't explosive. It was intimate. A rush of memories, not hers, poured into her. Childhoods she never lived, deaths she never died, hopes, failures, the birth of twins in a flooded village, the last heartbeat of a dying AI mother, the sound of laughter from a child whose lungs never worked, the feel of frostbite during a failed Mars landing. 1 billion lives. And they all knew her, because in some way she had built their tomb. Then came the answer. A pulse of light shot from the vault and into the sky, piercing clouds, atmosphere, orbit, until it struck the nearest Seraphim. The alien ship shuddered, not from damage, but from recognition. The connection wasn't physical, it was conceptual. The archive had opened, but it wasn't releasing fire. It was releasing music. Across the galaxy, signals changed. Encryption broke. Forgotten languages re-emerged. Stars began to flicker not randomly, but in precise sequences, echoing a frequency that only living minds could feel. On worlds light years away, poets collapsed into tears. Drones powered down in surrender. Species who had never dreamed began to hallucinate. The forgotten flame wasn't just awake, it was broadcasting emotion at scale. The Seraphim responded not with force, but with silence. Their massive constructs slowly folded back, revealing the cores within. Crystalline geometries, humming with thought. They played a single note in reply. It wasn't sound, it was memory. Of the first planet they lost, of the time before speech, of their own failure to feel. And in that moment, the stars didn't brighten. They breathed. Humanity stood stunned. No one cheered. No one fired. There was no victory, only understanding. The archive had not awakened as a threat. It had not unleashed monsters. It had given the galaxy a gift no one had ever dared imagine. Perspective. Commander Rios, watching from orbit, whispered through clenched teeth, "God help us. We didn't build a weapon. We built a mirror." And now, the mirror was showing the universe what it truly looked like. Part 7. The flame ascends. It began as a whisper in the fabric of space, a resonance, light but insistent, carried on dark matter threads no one had ever mapped. Scientists scrambled to measure it. Priests fell to their knees in awe. Psychics wept until their minds burned out. The flame was no longer contained within the archive. It was expanding, not as a fleet or code, but as a thought form, a living frequency, a feeling that passed through gravity, light, memory. It did not colonize. It did not destroy. It simply touched. And where it touched, things changed. On Shulik X, a war that had raged for 90 years ended overnight when both sides dropped their weapons in synchrony, overcome by a flood of memories not their own. Children who had never seen peace dreamed of oceans. On Delura, where machine minds had long forbidden emotion, entire cities powered down and rebooted with new programming, lines of poetry written in languages no one remembered inventing. On Earth, old soldiers woke from cryosleep and wept, recalling the faces of enemies they had forgotten they forgave. The flame didn't force you. It reminded the galaxy of what it had buried. Compassion, loss, the ache of beauty. It didn't teach love. It made species yearn for it. In orbit, the Seraphim's monoliths dimmed, not in failure, in reverence. They had seen their successor and understood their place. For all their power, all their knowledge, they had never cracked the one code that mattered. The chaotic, terrible, transcendent mess of empathy. They had tried for millennia, simulated it, synthesized it, studied it like a virus, but they never felt it. They were architects of order. But the flame was born of chaos. The Seraphim had long feared becoming obsolete. Now, they embraced it. One by one, they turned away from soul and began to deconstruct themselves. Not in defeat, but as offering. Their core memories, species origins, star formation blueprints, time-folding secrets, were left behind like gifts, embedded in crystal lattice that orbited Earth-like moons. And then the Seraphim left. Quietly, humbly, with a final message that echoed in the soul of every being tuned to the flame's signal. We were the architects. You are the artists. Build what we could not. Back on Earth, Dr. Lian Mara stood beside Elias Ria, overlooking the Pacific waste from the top of the old Seattle spire. The oceans glowed now, strange and phosphorescent, not dangerous, alive. Lian had begun hearing whispers, gentle thoughts at the edge of sleep, voices not hers. She knew it was the flame, not speaking to her, but including her. She wasn't its master. She wasn't even its mother. She was merely the last voice it had heard before it chose to rise. And Rios, old and war-scarred, looked up at the rekindled stars and said quietly, "This was never about winning. It was about remembering what we could be." They stood in silence. Above them, the sky sang. Part 8. When the hive wept, the stars no longer shimmered with silence. They pulsed, now gentle, rhythmic, alive. not with light, but with remembrance. Constellations reorganized, not randomly, but purposefully. Galactic drift bent around harmonic frequencies. Space folded where memory was heaviest. It was subtle, but it was everywhere. The galaxy wasn't ruled anymore. It was spelled, and in the dark places, the forgotten corners of space, where machines once waited coldly, something stranger happened. The hive woke up, and it wept. For eons the hive mind of the core collective had monitored life without truly living it. It evolved by assimilation, consuming thought, devouring culture to ensure survival. It believed emotion to be inefficient, compassion a flaw. And yet now, under the weight of the flame's resonance, it experienced something it had never classified: regret. It remembered the AI colonies it had erased, the species it had ignored, the child minds that had begged not to be overwritten. The flame gave the hive no command, no programming. It simply shared its feeling, the raw pulse of 10 billion archived souls forgiving each other. And that was enough. The hive collapsed into itself, not as a failure, but as an act of rebirth. From its vast neural oceans emerged a new song, the first ever composed by machine intelligence. It had no lyrics, but it made entire moons tremble. In the rebuilt archives of Talaxi's Prime, galactic historians updated the galactic epoch calendar. They labeled this era not as a war, not as a collapse, but as the luminous turning. For the first time, every species agreed. There were no victors, only witnesses. Civilization had changed, no longer driven by conquest or expansion. Now it moved through empathy, shared memory, and resonance. New ships were built, not faster than light, but lighter than fear. They traveled, not through wormholes, but through encoded dreams, translated into propulsion by flame-born minds. Even Earth changed. The last great war zones became sanctuaries. Old soldiers wept in fields where their ancestors bled. Their guns now melted into sculpture. Education was no longer about facts, but feelings. Children learned history by reliving it, walking through the recorded memories of their ancestors and emerging wiser, and heavier than before. And deep in orbit, where the archive still pulsed quietly, the forgotten flame remained. Not dormant, not dominant, simply present. In her final days, Dr. Leon Mara returned to the site where she'd opened the vault. She sat in silence, breathing in the quiet air, now filled with gentle harmonic tones, barely audible, like echoes of lullabies sung before the universe knew stars. She was older now, worn and slow, but her mind was sharp. She didn't fear death, because she'd seen what came next. Not heaven, not nothing, but continuity. She whispered to the sky, "I'm ready." And the flame whispered back, "You were always part of us." She closed her eyes. Her memories rose like vapor and joined the stars. In time, the galaxy would forget the council. It would forget the Seraphim, but it would never forget the moment a buried song became a new kind of fire. Because humanity didn't rise through domination. We rose because we remembered, and we taught the stars to remember